Right. What's up, Chaos? Welcome back to House Parties. We're pumped that you are here as we wrap up our series here in February, Asking for a Friend, where we have been looking at all these questions that you guys have had about dating and relationships and what goes into that and what the Bible may have to say about that. And we've been talking over and over again about how, sorry, I don't know what that was. We've been talking over and over again about how we don't want to see our relationship with Jesus as something separate from our life, but something that feeds into every area of our life. So we brought back the infamous and amazing, it's not infamous, just famous, just great, I don't know. The great, my great wife, Michelle, because we want to wrap up looking at the last few questions you guys had. So let's do it. All right, last week we talked about breakups. You guys had a lot of great questions about breakups. This week we're going to move into, you guys had a lot of questions about the physical side of dating, right? Like, what does that look like? What's okay? What's not okay? Lots of questions about that. So we are going to spend some time this week just talking about what the Bible might speak into in terms of the physical side of dating. So let's dive in. One of the first questions we saw right away that kind of sums it up is someone asked, hey, how important is it to save yourself for marriage? Which is a great question and is an important question. Here's the way we see it at Chaos. When we read the Bible and we study the Bible and we look at those things, we believe that God designed sex or the physical side of a relationship to that degree for a marriage relationship, right? So God designed it to be in this relationship between two people, a man and a woman, where they're committed to each other for life. And so as we talk about all the time about how God designs things, weird. As we talk all the time about how God designs things, we believe that following the way that God designs something is what's absolutely best for us. Doesn't mean it's the easiest, doesn't mean it's the most convenient, but it's what's actually best for us and will lead us to the life that He has for us, which we believe, as Jesus says, is a full life or the best life.
Ditto to what he said.
We're on the same page. So as with any part of our life, I think as we talk about with anything, whatever part of our life it is, we believe that following the way that God designed things is the best thing for us. So, and that includes the physical side of a relationship. Here's the truth about well, what if I've already messed something up? Well, the truth is every one of us human beings has messed up in some way, shape, or form. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short. We all mess up in a million different areas of our life. And that's what we talked about in January. We talked about the gospel, right? That's the whole point of the gospel, that no matter how many times we fall, no matter how many times we mess up, no matter how many times or how many different ways we fail to follow God's design, God still loves us. Jesus still died for us. He still rescues us. He still wants to draw us back to Him. He wants to, the Bible would say, redeem or make every bad part of our life restored and fixed and repaired. And so it's true no matter how many times you drop the ball or what area of life you drop the ball. We did the same thing.
And the beautiful thing about the gospel is that just because that may have been something that you have done does not mean that that's something that you are now chained to keep doing. You have freedom in Christ, and we talk about the resurrection power to be like, hey, this may have been who I was or how I chose to live my life, but I have the power of Christ to move forward and be like, I don't want to be like that anymore. And it also means that doesn't mean that because Jesus died for these sins, He knew I was going to sin anyway. It does not give us free range to just sin and be like, don't worry, big man stairs, got it, So it should empower us that we are not defined by our sin, and that does not define us, and it should then empower us to move forward. There are a lot of great questions about boundaries and feeling pressured in your relationship. And so for sure, kind of verbatim here, how are you going to be in a relationship where you don't want to do things but the other person does? Or kind of wrapping in as well, how to tell someone no, or
what to do if I feel pressured into something. There were a lot of questions like that.
A lot of questions about that. And I think we talked about this in the last video, but definitely setting those boundaries early on. If you have to write them out, so then that way you can keep coming back to them to remind yourself, these are my boundaries, and then communicating those boundaries. I think a lot of times, we get excited in a relationship, kind of get swept up in all the feelings, and a lot of times we start to compromise because we want somebody to like us, and we want someone to want us. And so we start might seeing those flags of, hey, they're starting to pressure me to do things that I don't really want to do, but I don't want to lose them, or I don't want them to lose interest, or I don't want them to leave me for somebody else who will do those things. And the simple answer is what to do if someone wants to do things that you don't want to do. You communicate clearly that you do not want to do them, and if you see a pattern over time that someone keeps revisiting that same concept of wanting to push you to do something that you have explicitly communicated that you do not want to do, I'm sorry, the real blunt version is then you should not be with them, because clearly they don't respect you and they don't respect your boundaries, because if they did, they wouldn't keep asking.
I think if you've clearly set up boundaries or just expectations for your relationship on what you believe in your walk with Jesus is best for dating, and that person just like doesn't care or maybe says they care but continues to try to push them, I think they're just showing that they don't have what's best for you in mind maybe, and they're not as caring about that side of the relationship. It's more about what they can get, and I think that Absolutely. Is what we would call these days a red flag for sure. So I think communicate clearly is so good, because I did not do that for a long time in my life. Michelle helped me a lot with that. And then I think, just be aware of that and don't compromise those things just for someone. So then I think maybe that kind of segues us into questions maybe about like, what are some good boundaries, or how can I set up boundaries, or like where do I start, I guess, with these kinds of expectations for a relationship?
Well, I think the tough thing with boundaries is like, we're not gonna sit here and be like, all right, if you're this age to this age, okay.
Here are the rules.
Here are the rules, X, Y, Z. There's not a clear little handout we can give each one of you to follow. Essentially, with your boundaries, like you want to do what is pleasing to the Lord. And when you're in that relationship and you find yourself together, you know when you're together and you start to think things or want to do things, and if it's not glorifying to the Lord, then there's a boundary right there. If it's going to lead you farther into doing other things, it's a boundary that needs to be set. And sometimes it's not even like I will not do this. Maybe it's a couple of boundaries set before that. So like not putting yourself in the position that once you're presented with the opportunity, you can't say no. Like maybe you're like, I know myself, I should not be alone with someone because I may have this boundary of I don't want to kiss someone, but if we're alone, I may want to kiss someone when I'm alone, who knows?
And I think it's not about drawing the line right at where you think it goes from okay to sin. I think it's setting it well inside of that area, because that's what a good boundary is. It's not like on the edge of where you think, well, this is probably okay, this is sin. I also think that's pretty gray and blurry and depends on certain things. But if we set our boundaries well within the range, we'll know that we'll be safe. And I think if you're curious, like, hey, what works best for me? How should I know? Again, we talked about this last week and every week, I think. Find someone who loves you, who loves Jesus, and talk to them about it. It can be your small group leader. It might be, this is going to sound weird, but it might be your parents. They love you, they care about you, they want what's best for you. Like, it could be any of those things. Just find someone who loves you, talk about those things, and walk into your new relationship with those kind of things in mind. All right, last thing that you guys asked a lot of questions about was you had some questions about red flags. Like, is this a red flag? Should my boyfriend do this or say this? Should my girlfriend do these things? I don't know. Like, there were some red flags questions. So we just want to talk really quickly about some of the red flags that y'all talked about. The first one, I just want to get this out of the way real quick. There was a question in there that had a boyfriend speaking very negatively to a girl and being very unkind and just not at all a good boyfriend. Just dump him. That's all I'm going to say. Just if someone in high school or middle school just doesn't treat you or speak to you well, like, you don't have to be with them. You can just dump them, and you probably should. So that's, if they speak meanly and unkind to you, and it's a consistent thing, no matter how much you speak to them, just dump them. That's all. Okay. Yeah, that's a red flag. Dump that person.
Red flag, we talked a lot about this already kind of in the other section, but what if someone likes you for the wrong reasons? And that's a huge red flag. Obviously, and you can see that in your boundaries. When you set up those boundaries, it's a good way to test if someone just wants to see what they can get out of you, because they're going to be constantly testing those boundaries. And you don't want someone who wants you for just what you can give them. You want someone to want you for your personality, for the things that you like, and so much that makes you who you are. And so for that one thing of this is what you can give them, that's a huge red flag. That is just that they're looking to use somebody, and you're worth more than that. We don't put up with that. That's a huge red flag.
I think a lot of the red flags questions were pretty clearly red flags. So if you had one about a red flag, like most of them pretty much were. And I think just that's where we talk about, like, can I make sure to put my desire to be loved and like wanted and accepted? Can I just understand that this person isn't what's going to fulfill all that? And actually the truth is, where that real fulfillment comes from is knowing that I'm loved and accepted by my Creator and my Savior. And I know that that's hard to understand. But when we set up these boundaries, these expectations, these approaches to dating, like it helps us better understand, and to sacrifice those to try to be okay with this red flag just so that you can feel that is, I think that as you get older, you'll keep learning. We hope you learn younger than probably we did, which is that it's not worth it, and to find acceptance and love with our Creator and with this group at Chaos and with these friends is much more valuable than that.
Yeah, especially the younger you are, there might be small red flags. And so they seem okay to kind of ignore. You're kind of like, yeah, whatever. As time goes on, and that's the habit you've created of ignoring red flags and not knowing your worth and being like, I'm not going to accept someone who treats me like this or uses me like this. Then when you're older, it becomes a lot harder to really set those boundaries, really know your worth, and really be confident to say, no, this is not what I want in someone that I'm dating and potentially going to marry. Because like Dan mentioned, like our fulfillment comes from the one who created us, but we're also human. Like we want to be loved and we want to be wanted. And a lot of times we put up with a lot and settle for less because someone gives us a scrap of attention or a scrap of affection. And we think that's better than nothing. And it's just not true. And so then yes, having a romantic relationship doesn't mean that it takes away all of your loneliness. As we've talked about, you cannot be in a romantic relationship and not be lonely as you fill it with other things in your life. Obviously, primarily we want to say Jesus, God, your relationship there, but community, friendship, so many other things that we fill our lives with to not be lonely. Because in the end, it's not worth it to put up with those things just so you don't feel a little bit lonely.
So we answered a lot of questions this month. We didn't have enough time to answer every single one. And if you might have some extra ones, maybe as we walk through this, more have come up. You can definitely feel free to talk to your small group leader. You can find me and ask me or Michelle. We'd love to talk to you about it or something. But we hope this month has helped. We hope that we can begin to see even something like dating through our walk with Jesus and allow Jesus to be our top priority and everything else to filter through that. Anything else?
I love you guys.